This is one area where we cannot have budget cuts, because we must wage what I have called total war against public enemy number one in the United States, the problem of dangerous drugs.
During the 1960s, drug use was spreading across the country as the youth counterculture embarked on widespread use. From 1960 to 1970, the number of Americans who had tried marijuana had increased from only a few 100,000 to 8 million. Nixon responded to this new group of anti-fundamental youth by launching what he would later call a war on drugs, as mentioned in a 1971 speech. He first stated to the press on July 14, 1969,
"We have increased the amount of money for handling the problem of dangerous drugs sevenfold. It will be $600 million this year."
Nixon had no difficulty having his demands met. He launched initiatives and operations such as the Comprehensive Drug Abuse Prevention Act, the Control Act of 1970, the DEA, and Operation Rescue, in order to attempt to control the use of illegal drugs in the U.S. and the importation of them from Mexico.
From that point on, the stage was set for a political crusade against immorality.
You see, homosexuality, though immorality generally, these are the enemies of strong societies. That's why the communists and the left-wingers are pushing each other. They're trying to destroy us. Yep. But God damn it, we have got to stand up to these people.
As author, lawyer, and political activist William John Cox wrote, "Since its origins almost 4 decades ago, the war on drugs has been more a political assault, particularly on the 1960s counterculture, than rational government policy. Nixon saw it as a way to hit back against pot-smoking Vietnam protesters, and presidents since have feared being smeared as soft on drugs."
Started with Nixon, a guy who commissioned someone to do a study on marijuana use, didn't like the results, and used his personal feelings and personal opinions about marijuana to totally change the course of drug policy in the United States.
Nixon put an overwhelming emphasis on the fight against drugs in America through the use of anti-drug propaganda.
It's stimulating, mind-expanding, safer to use than alcohol. It's the in thing, the hula hoop of the jet generation, and as much a part of growing up as smoking corn silk behind the back fence. Such are the myths concerning marijuana. Myths that lull thousands of young people into experimenting with a noxious weed. The facts are otherwise. Marijuana is an intoxicating, mind-muddling drug. Its use can lead to abnormal behavior, to psychological dependence, and to abuse of other drugs. The human brain, after all, is made for thinking, not fumigating. It's hardly a tinker toy for experimenting with drugs.
This is John Smith, honor student, football star, Vietnam veteran. Yet somewhere along the way, he chose the road to anarchy and self-destruction. Now, why should a normally decent, normally intelligent young person like John Smith choose the road to communism over America and freedom? For one thing, our youth of today are the object of the most extensive, intensive, diabolical campaign ever conceived.
However, all of the propaganda issued went against the findings from the Best Drug Examination Commission ever produced.
That we do not feel that private use or private possession in one's own home should have the stigma of criminalization, that people who experiment should not be criminalized for that particular behavior.
Schaefer was the chair to this national committee that did research on marijuana, and they found out that marijuana has very, very little negative consequences, especially compared to alcohol. The study found that there was no significant physical, biochemical, or mental abnormalities that could be attributed solely to marijuana use.
So although 10,000 people died last year from their use of cocaine and heroin, it's estimated that 450,000 died from their use of tobacco. 100,000 people died last year from their use of legal prescription drugs.
Why the f*** is it illegal? I don't know. Aspirin is perfectly legal, but if you take 13 of them motherfuckers, it'll be your last headache.
It's estimated that 150,000 people died last year from their use of alcohol. And I'm not talking now about drinking and driving. I'm talking about just the health consequence of drinking.
Yet despite the facts about the drugs being used in America, the war continued on through the conservative presidencies and was even escalated during the Reagan administration.
Leading medical researchers are coming to the conclusion that marijuana, pot, grass, whatever you want to call it, is probably the most dangerous drug in the United States, and we haven't begun to find out all of the ill effects, but they are permanent ill effects.
The notable philosopher and activist Noam Chomsky resides differently from this conservative view of the drug war. He does so with good reason.
In fact, the explosion of the war on drugs here was in the 1980s and since. And during that period, the U.S. incarceration programs just flew off the spectrum. I mean, back around 1980, the U.S. was sort of slightly at the high end of industrial societies in per capita incarceration, but within the spectrum. And now it's 5 to 10 times as high as comparable countries.
If you've got a nonviolent drug offender, particularly if they're kids, effectively kids, even if they're tried as adults, even if they're 18, 19, 20, that the worst thing we can do is to lock them up for a long period of time without any education, if they're functionally illiterate, without any skills or training where they can get a real... They're out on the streets, can't be hired by anybody. What are they going to do? They're going to go back to dealing drugs. Only now they probably become more locked into a life of crime because of their stay in a prison.
One of the changes that I would make, and actually the government is making a big change, is drug courts. The reason why I say that, because I know for a fact the numbers of people that are incarcerated for drugs is higher than any other crime that we have, drug related. They need to stop incarcerating people and they need more treatment. If we spent more money on education and treatment, we wouldn't have the problem as big as we have.
I'm trying to get kids to self-evaluate, because again, they're not going to listen to me the first, second, third, fourth, fifth time. That's why we try to utilize community resources. And I give them information so they can make their own decision.
Like I said, it's a terminology. There is no war on drugs. You have to educate people. It's about education.
Well, the DARE program, when it was in Glenfield, and myself and Carlos Wormley, which is a police friend of mine, we were friends socially, and he was also the DARE officer. We kind of modified it a little bit because the DARE program itself wasn't successful.
I think it needs to be just a little more detailed. Like, you can't just say, don't do it. You need to really honestly show them people and have people come in and tell them, let me tell you how it ruined my life. You need to have teenagers come in and talk to them. But I do think that it's a very good program. It's a very good start. But I think if it was a little bit more raw, it would be more effective. Okay. Kids are visual. They need to see it. They need to say, yeah, I don't believe it. I need to see it. You can talk it, but I want to see it.
It was kind of like a combination of getting familiar with a police officer and seeing that a police officer is not only one that's going to arrest you, but they're there to assist you if you have a question or concern about something. He turned more into a resource officer at that time. And, you know, we still have a resource officer here at our school, Officer Nelson, but, you know, Carlos was pretty kid-friendly. You know, you don't have to arrest everybody when you see him doing something wrong, but he was there to assist kids to get help, which was really important. I think that you just can't give them some movie or some video that you brought out in Minnesota that has all white kids in it or all a certain racial group in it. You have to hit kids with what they can feel comfortable with and what's going to reach them. Weed and alcohol are out of control to a certain extent that, you know, pot smoking, weed smoking is like smoking cigarettes was 5 years ago. I think much more kids are using, much more kids are dealing to support the habit. You know, way back when, maybe 1 out of 20 kids was probably dealing. I think now it's probably like 2 out of 10, 3 out of 10 to support. And it's all across all economic, racial, divide. I mean, you have kids that are going to Ivy League schools. You have kids that, you know, it doesn't matter anymore.
Much. I think the numbers are a little too high. I've been here as an SRO since 2002, since the class of 2002, and I've definitely seen an increase in the use of marijuana and illicit drugs.
The trend is that most of the kids start use between 7th, 8th grade, or that transition from 8th grade to 9th grade. So it is happening younger. I've had hundreds of parents call the student assistance counselors throughout the year asking us for support and help and how to deal with issues. In 10 minutes you could be on a a porn site, or you could be communicating with some guy in Louisiana on how to make a meth lab. I mean, of course, you could type in drug masking, Google drug masking, and you'll get 250,000 hits on how to get over on a drug test. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so it makes my job a lot more difficult. So at the end of the time I was a senior, I ended up the university hired me to do a stratified random sample of the college community. And when the results came back, they didn't like them because it was like 95.5% of the campus partied on a regular basis. And that was a small little school in West Virginia, so I can imagine what it was like at the big universities. And now there's competition to who has the best party school in the country. There's too much emphasis on that. Now, I'm not saying that we're not producing brilliant kids with great ideas and going to great schools. I'm just saying that, there is a war. And we don't even recognize that we're in it, and we're losing it.
It's a losing battle. The DEA we're losing. The DEA clearly states that we're losing, and I agree with them. We are. It's just a waste of time right now at this point, especially the fight for marijuana.
In terms of legalization of drugs, I think that the battle, the war on drugs has been an utter failure, and I think that we need to rethink and decriminalize our marijuana laws.
So, honestly, I think they're going to honestly change it. Maybe, like I said, not in my lifetime, but it is going to change. There is going to be a change. I know that it's going to come.
15 million people have been imprisoned for pot use, okay? This has cost our country $1 trillion in costs.
No.
$1 trillion.
No. Listen.
Okay, we're in a deficit, and we're criminalizing people for personal marijuana use.
Yes. When are we going to say, you're right, because when are we going to say, hey, look, this is how it began. It began in madness. It was a stupid, rage-fueled, conspiracy-fueled, plot by a president who got thrown out of office in shame.
Right.
Right? Why do we continue to fight his senseless, asinine war?